She was the kind of mother America used to be built on. The woman who woke before the sun, who carried the weight of a family on her back, even when no one bothered to notice the way her shoulders trembled under it. She gave everything, every breath, every paycheck, every dream she once had for herself, all poured into her children with the kind of unconditional love only a mother can understand. But as the years went by, something dark and painful began to reveal itself. The very children she raised to stand tall had started looking down on her. Not with anger, not with hate. Something worse. Indifference. The quiet, cruel kind that strips a person of worth without ever saying a word. They treated her as if she had nothing left to offer except her labor. Babysitting, cooking, cleaning, driving, staying up late with sick grandkids, waking up early to get them ready for school. Every task she did with shaking knees and tired eyes was brushed off as, "Your duty, Mom, duty." As if she were a machine built only to serve. As if she didn't have a name, a past, a heartbeat, a life outside the four walls of their homes. She had worked her entire life. Long hours at a job that didn't care about her age, double shifts, bruised hands, swollen feet, all to make sure her children never felt the hunger or fear she had once felt growing up. And now those same children had the nerve, the boldness, the cold entitlement to look at her and see only free childcare. She never asked for anything. Not money, not gifts, not praise. All she ever wanted was a little respect. Thank you. A moment of appreciation, a sign that her sacrifices weren't invisible. But the more she gave, the more they took. The more she bent, the more they pushed. They did not see the woman who had once stayed awake for 3 nights straight when her son had pneumonia. They didn't remember the nights she worked at a diner till 2 a.m. just to afford her daughter's college textbooks. They didn't care about the times she went without new clothes so they could wear brand names. They forgot every tear she cried behind closed doors when life got too heavy, but she refused to let them see her break. Her kids watched her unload groceries, carry diaper bags, push strollers, and run errands while they sat comfortably on the couch scrolling through their phones. They didn't notice the way she winced when she lifted heavy things. They didn't care that her back ached for days after babysitting 2 toddlers alone. They didn't even hear the pain in her voice when she forced a smile and said, "Of course I can help." They treated her kindness like weakness, her generosity like an obligation. Whenever she tried to set a limit, they guilt-tripped her. "But Mom, you're home anyway. Mom, you don't have anything else going on. Mom, it's just for a few hours. Mom, come on, you're the grandma. That's your job." No, it was not her job. It was her love. And they mistook that love for servitude. She looked around one day, really looked, and realized she had become invisible, a ghost, a background figure in the very lives she had built from scratch. No one asked how she felt. No one cared where she wanted to go. No one wondered what she needed or dreamed of. She had become a walking solution to everyone's problems, while having no one to help with her own. She was the free babysitter, the free maid, the free chauffeur, the free everything, except a free woman. Inside her, something started cracking. At first it was small, a tiny, fragile fracture that came when her daughter snapped, "Mom, you were supposed to pick up the kids an hour ago." Then it deepened when her son tossed the baby into her arms and said, "She needs a bath. We're going to dinner. Watch her for the night." And then the final blow, a comment she overheard between her children, whispered but sharp enough to slice her heart open. "She doesn't have a life anyway. What else is she gonna do?" That sentence echoed through her bones like a broken promise. No life. That's how they saw her. A woman who existed only when they needed something. They didn't see the dream still flickering in her chest. They didn't see the exhaustion that almost drowned her. They didn't see the woman behind the work. But she saw everything, and somewhere deep inside, in the place where a mother's strength hides when everyone else takes it for granted, a spark ignited. A spark that whispered a truth they never expected her to hear. She was done being treated like nothing. Not someday, not eventually. Now, and that spark. That was the beginning of her revenge. They never saw her as a woman with a heartbeat, a mind and a history, only as convenience wrapped in skin. To them she was not Mom, not the woman who raised us, not the person who sacrificed decades of her youth, but a tool, a walking, breathing service provider, a free employee they believed they owned. Whenever she arrived at their homes, they didn't greet her with warmth. They handed her chores like she was clocking in for a shift. Fold this. Mom, take them to school. Mom, can you stay overnight? They didn't even ask. They assigned. She would be sitting on the couch for a few minutes of rest, and suddenly a bag of laundry would hit her lap. They never paused to wonder if she was tired, if her joints were aching, if she had slept last night, or if her soul was drowning in exhaustion. The thought never crossed their minds, because in their world, her needs didn't exist. They would drop their children off at her house without warning, without respect, without consideration. Sometimes with a rushed, careless text. Kids are on the way. We're running late. She would cancel her plans, postpone appointments, swallow her own life just so theirs could run smoothly. When they went on vacations, she stayed home, watching the kids, cooking their meals, trying to keep up with the endless chaos they left behind. They enjoyed beaches and sunsets while she battled tantrums and diapers. Not once did they bring her along, not once did they say, Mom deserves a break too. Her birthday came and went with nothing but a phone call asking if she could babysit. Holidays. She cooked, cleaned, decorated, and they showed up late, scrolled through their phones, and left without even helping pick up a plate. They expected her to be available 24/7, like a service app they didn't have to pay for, and when she dared to say she needed a day off, they hit her with guilt. Mom, don't you love your grandkids? Mom, you know we're busy. Mom, you're all they have. They twisted love into obligation, twisted motherhood into servitude. She looked into their eyes and searched for the children she once held in her arms. But now all she saw were adults who believed love made her their property. They mistook her kindness for weakness, her generosity for an endless supply, her silence for approval. They didn't notice the tears she wiped before knocking on their door. They didn't hear the sigh she hid behind her smile. They didn't see the part of her spirit that dimmed every time they treated her like she existed for their convenience. They didn't see anything, because they never bothered to look. And that blindness was the biggest mistake they ever made, because the woman they dismissed as just Mom was slowly building the courage to become someone they would never forget. It happened on a weekend that was supposed to be simple. Just a few hours of babysitting, just a couple of errands, just one more thing. For her kids who never saw how heavily each request weighed on her tired bones. It started on a Saturday morning when her daughter dumped 2 toddlers on her doorstep with the words, "We'll be back in a few hours," and vanished for the entire day. She didn't bring diapers, didn't bring snacks, didn't even leave a schedule. It was assumed the grandmother would figure it out, because she always did. But that day, things were different. The kids were sick, cranky, and restless. Her back hurt so badly she had to hold the railing just to stand. She tried to make soup, change diapers, clean the messes spreading like wildfire, all while ignoring the sharp pain stabbing her spine. Then her son called, not to check on her, not to help, but to ask, "Mom, since you already have the kids, can you also watch mine overnight? We have plans." Plans. They always had plans. Plans she was expected to sacrifice her life for. She said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't know how to say no anymore. By evening, 4 children were crying, screaming, running, spilling, arguing. She was sweating, shaking, exhausted down to her bones. At 2 a.m., she sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by half-washed dishes and half-folded laundry, her body trembling from fatigue. She wondered how she had become this. A shadow, a background character in everyone else's life. On Sunday morning, the final blow came. Her daughter texted, "We'll pick them up tonight instead. You don't mind, right?" That sentence cracked something inside her. Something deep, painful, and irreversible. She didn't reply. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just stared at the message with eyes that no longer carried hurt. Only clarity. She realized she had spent years being everything to them while they were nothing for her. She realized her life had shrunk to babysitting shifts she never agreed to. She realized they saw her existence as a convenience, not a person. And then, in that silent kitchen, something awakened inside her. Something fierce, something powerful. She stood up slowly, wiped her tears, and whispered to herself, "I'm done." That weekend didn't just break her. It rebuilt her. It lit a fire that turned a tired mother into a woman ready for a revenge they would never see coming. And from that moment on, every step she took was no longer for them. It was for herself. She didn't leave in anger. She didn't slam doors. She didn't throw accusations, cry for sympathy, or beg anyone to notice her pain. No, she left with the kind of silence that shakes a house long after the door has closed. For years she had been the center of everyone else's world, yet invisible in her own. Her hands washed their dishes, her feet ran their errands, her back carried their responsibilities, and her heart absorbed the disrespect they tossed at her like scraps on the floor. They didn't see the woman anymore. They saw the service. They didn't see the mother who once worked 3 jobs to raise them. They saw the free maid who owed them. They didn't see the grandmother who woke up early to babysit. They saw the convenience they were entitled to. And every single day, they chipped away at her humanity without even realizing it. But the silence inside her had been growing, ripening, tightening like a knot ready to snap. They didn't hear the change inside her, but it was there. A quiet storm forming, a storm they would never see coming. It started on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where everything felt heavy. Her bones, her heart, her breath. She woke up before dawn as always, made breakfast for the grandchildren, packed school lunches, folded laundry from the night before, and wiped the kitchen counters that weren't messy because of her. She moved through the house like a shadow, unnoticed, unthanked. She listened to her grown children argue in the hallway about their schedules, their meetings, their deadlines, none of which ever included time to ask her how she was doing or if she even wanted to live this endless cycle of exhaustion. And then, something clicked. It was small, it was quiet, but it was final. Her daughter shouted from the living room, "Mom, I left the kids' clothes in the dryer! Can you iron them before school?" Her son called out seconds later, "And Mom, don't forget to start the dishwasher. You always forget." Always forget. The same woman who remembered every birthday, every doctor appointment, every bill, every crisis was being told she always forgets. The same woman who raised them with fire and sacrifice was being treated like a glitch in their perfect routine. Their tone wasn't a request. It wasn't gratitude. It was entitlement, sharp, casual, rotten. She looked around the house. A house she didn't own, but maintained like her life depended on it. Toys scattered. Dishes stacked. Shoes everywhere. A toddler screaming. A teenager demanding breakfast. A daughter-in-law scrolling on her phone. A son rushing out the door without so much as a hello. And she realized something so brutally clear it stole her breath. They had built their entire comfort on her back, and they expected her to carry it until the day she died. That thought was the final thread. The thread that separated a tired mother from a woman ready to reclaim her dignity. She walked quietly to her small room, the same room they gave her, temporarily, 2 years ago. She opened the closet. She grabbed the old suitcase she hadn't used since her husband died. She ran her fingers across its dusty surface, and for the first time in years, she smiled, not because she was happy but because she felt alive again. She began packing with calm, deliberate movements. A few clothes, her medications, her passport, The money she had secretly saved from babysitting jobs they didn't even know she took. Every item she placed in that suitcase was a silent rebellion. Every zipper she closed was a declaration of independence. No one noticed. Not her son walking past her door complaining about being late to work. Not her daughter-in-law laughing at something on her phone. Not the grandchildren screaming for snacks. No one looked. No one asked. No one cared. And that was the moment that hurt her the most and healed her the fastest. By the time the sun stood high in the sky, she had packed, dressed, and tied her shoes. She heard someone shout again from the hallway, "Mom, are you making lunch today or what?" She didn't answer. She didn't even turn her head. She took her suitcase, stepped outside, and closed the door behind her with a gentleness that carried more power than any scream she could have ever released. The street was quiet. The wind was warm. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't carrying someone else's burden. She walked with purpose, with strength, with a fire in her chest that felt unfamiliar yet liberating. She reached the bus stop with her heart pounding in a way that wasn't fear. It was freedom. She boarded the bus, sat by the window, and allowed herself one long, deep breath, a breath she had been holding for far too many years. The driver asked her where she was headed. She looked out the window, her eyes reflecting the life she was reclaiming, and answered with a power she didn't know she still had. "Somewhere they can't reach me." But the true beauty of her disappearance wasn't the act of leaving. It was the silence. A silence that would echo through her children's lives like an earthquake. A silence that would force them to confront every selfish word, every careless demand, every ounce of entitlement they threw at her. A silence that would break their comfort into pieces they would struggle to pick up. Because this time, she didn't leave as a mother. She left as a woman finally choosing herself. And her absence would speak louder than 1,000 heated arguments. It would teach the one lesson they never allowed her to teach. A mother's love is deep, but it is not free, not when respect is gone, not when dignity is stolen, not when her soul is tired. And by the time they realized what they had lost, she would already be long gone, holding the power they never believed she would take back. When she disappeared, she didn't take anything except her clothes, but she took something far more powerful than any belonging. She took herself. And her absence, the very thing her children always took for granted, hit their household like a thunderstorm tearing through a quiet town. The moment they realized she was gone, confusion spread through the house like smoke. At first they weren't worried, they were irritated. "Where is Mom? She knows the kids need breakfast," her daughter snapped, pacing the kitchen with a tone dripping in entitlement. Her son replied with the careless confidence of a man who had never lived a single day without his mother picking up the pieces of his life. "She probably went for a walk. She'll be back." But then the hours passed, and the cracks in their comfort became fractures. The children refused to get ready for school. There was no one to braid hair, no one to find lost shoes, no one to soothe the morning tantrums. Breakfast wasn't made. Lunches weren't packed. They left the house late, yelling, scrambling, throwing things into bags, spilling cereal across the counter and leaving a disaster behind. That was day one. By day two, their entire routine, the routine built entirely on her labor, collapsed like a house held together with cheap glue. Dishes piled up in the sink. Laundry baskets overflowed. Trash cans filled. The smell of old food drifted through the kitchen, their once perfectly functioning home. The one she organized, cleaned, polished, and held together without thanks, turned into a battlefield of neglected chores, and they realized something brutal: the home didn't run on their strength. It ran on hers. Without her hands, without her eyes, without her constant movement, their world was chaos. The daughter-in-law, who once bragged she didn't need help, now broke down crying because she had no idea how to manage 2 toddlers while working from home. The son, who once thought he deserved a break after work, now stumbled through nights of exhausted children, burnt dinners, and endless demands. Their arguments grew louder. Their stress grew heavier. Their marriage, once cushioned by the grandmother, who quietly carried their responsibilities, began to shake under the weight of real life. The grandchildren missed her too, more than anyone else. They stood at the living room window every afternoon asking, "Where's Grandma? Why isn't she here?" They were used to her warm hugs, her gentle voice, her magical ability to make everything calm. Their parents tried to fill her role, but they quickly discovered what she had known all along: love without patience is noise. And they did not have her patience. Bills began piling up as constant takeout replaced her home-cooked meals. The house grew dirtier by the hour. The children's homework was forgotten. Their schedules fell apart. Every tiny thing she did, things they dismissed as nothing, as easy, as her duty, suddenly became mountains they didn't know how to climb. And as days turned into a week, frustration turned into panic. But the real shock came when they realized the emotional gap she had left behind. The silence of the house didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. It felt wrong. It felt like punishment. The same silence they once ignored now screamed at them, reminding them of every disrespectful comment, every ungrateful action, every moment they treated her like a machine instead of a mother. Her son replayed the last words he spoke to her, impatient, dismissive, unkind. His chest tightened with guilt. The daughter-in-law, who once relied on her for everything, sat on the edge of the bed crying. "We were too hard on her, we pushed her away." But regret doesn't wash dishes. Regret doesn't calm screaming children. Regret doesn't restore comfort. Regret only burns. And they burned. They called her phone. No answer. They checked with neighbors. No one had seen her. They finally filed a report, not because they feared harm, but because they finally understood what losing her truly meant. Days continued to fall apart. The home became a place of stress rather than warmth. The children grew more restless. The couple grew more distant. The son's work performance dropped. The daughter-in-law's anxiety spiked. Everything, every piece of their well-structured life, crumbled. They began to understand the weight she had carried, the weight they had forced on her shoulders for years without gratitude. And with every new struggle, one truth hit them harder. They treated her like a free service, but she was the foundation of their entire life. Now, that foundation was gone, and their perfect comfort zone shattered into dust. She didn't return immediately. She stayed gone long enough for the lesson to settle deep into their bones. Long enough for their routines to collapse. Long enough for their guilt to boil. Long enough for them to face the consequences of their entitlement. And while they struggled, she healed. She stayed in a quiet hotel by the coast, waking up to sunrise instead of children screaming her name. She sipped coffee slowly, not rushed, not burnt, not standing behind a stove. She walked on beaches, wrote in a journal, listened to music she had forgotten she loved, ate meals she didn't have to cook, and slept without interruption. She rediscovered herself, the woman she used to be before motherhood swallowed her whole. She remembered her worth. She remembered her voice. She remembered she wasn't born to serve grown adults who refused to stand on their own feet. And when she walked back through her children's door weeks later, she didn't come as the same tired, overworked grandmother they had pushed to the edge. She came back with fire in her spine, power in her steps, and boundaries sharper than a blade. Her children stared at her, speechless. She looked healthier, rested, strong. And her presence felt different, not soft, not desperate, not apologetic. It felt commanding. She placed her suitcase down and said 5 words that made their stomachs drop. "I'm not your babysitter anymore." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of every tear she had ever swallowed. She walked through the messy house, observing the chaos. The sink full of dishes. The toys everywhere. The unwashed clothes. The exhaustion on their faces. She saw everything they once expected her to handle, but instead of pity, she felt justice. For the first time in her life, she didn't rush to fix anything. She let them sit in the consequences of their own choices. Her son tried to apologize, stumbling over his guilt. Her daughter-in-law cried, promising they would try harder, but she didn't weaken. Her softness had cost her years of her life. She wasn't going back to that version of herself. She sat down at the table with the posture of a queen, reclaiming her kingdom. She laid out her new rules, firm, unbreakable, unapologetic. I will not live here. I will not raise your children. I will not clean your home. If you need my help, you will ask respectfully. If I say no, you will accept it. If you ever treat me like a servant again, I will walk out and never return. Her words sliced through the room like lightning. They weren't threats. They were promises built from years of pain. And her children, now humbled by the harsh reality of life without her, nodded with fear and respect. For the first time, they saw her, truly saw her. Not as a tool, not as free labor, not as a backup plan, but as a woman with power. A woman who had survived heartbreak, exhaustion, underappreciation, and disrespect, and still rose stronger. They realized that her disappearance wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of self-respect. And they realized she didn't come back because they needed her. She came back because she chose to, on her terms, under her rules, with her dignity intact. From that day forward, everything changed. She visited only when she wanted. She helped only when treated with respect. She spent her days living, not serving. She traveled. She made friends. She took classes. She laughed again. Her children learned to parent their own children. They learned to run their own home. They learned gratitude, humility, responsibility. Her absence taught them. Her return transformed them. Her strength redefined her. Because she was no longer the invisible mother. She was no longer the free babysitter. She was no longer the exhausted woman they drained dry. She became the one thing they never imagined. A mother with power. A woman with fire. A force they would never underestimate again.